Good afternoon. Can we develop a European cargo bike ecosystem to hasten the decarb of goods and services transport? Well, before we do that, we need to decide whether or not it's going to be worthwhile. Are we going to scale up? We think there are two strands. There's the domestic leisure and sort of social use of cargo bikes or family bikes. And then there's the commercial organizational use, bikes for business. If you look at cargo bikes for deliveries and services, we've had a very close look at the light commercial vehicle sector, below 3.5 tons. It is, of course, currently dominated by diesel. There are 2 million sold in 2019. And if you actually look at their ecosystem, it's pretty brilliantly organized. And what we think from the research we've done, and we can back this up for those of you who wish to know more, is that we could replace 1 in 2 light commercial vehicle sales with cargo bikes. And that we could do that by 2030 in order to meet the decarbonisation objectives everybody's adopting. And that would be 1 million cargo bike sales a year by 2030. Going back to the family bikes, the private use, the levels of use, regular use that is, of cargo bikes in Copenhagen are estimated to be 40,000. If you extrapolate that for other European cities, again, you can get up to 1 million cargo bike sales a year by 2030. So we think that we're looking at 2 million cargo bikes sold annually by 2030. And even if you conservatively have them at €3,000 each, that's a 6 billion annual sales market. Plus the full ecosystem that lies behind any successful and thriving mainstream transport mode. So what ecosystem do we need to support this growth? And if you just linger on this slide for a second, let's just unpick it a little. £363 per month gets you this multi-thousand-pound van. You can walk into a Ford Transit dealer or any other of the major light commercial vehicle dealers. And so long as you've got the credit, you can walk out literally with the keys to a van 2 hours later. That is incredibly slick. And the fascinating thing on here for me is it says 10,000 miles per annum. Well, do you know that's less than 28 miles a day on a 7-day operation, which actually you can definitely do by e-cargo bike without a doubt. So they're not even trying to sort of say, well, we're doing 50,000 miles a year. They're just saying 10. So what does the cargo bike ecosystem look like? Well, you've got to be able to get the right bike. So choosing, probably new, but mainly because the second-hand market is underdeveloped at the moment, choosing the right brand and right design of cargo bike is an issue. And if you're not familiar, you need good services to enable you to choose. You need the bike to be secure, particularly if you're carrying higher value goods. And so, you want, for instance, an efficient security system. So the box might slam shut, but open with a fob, rather like with a car. You need to be able to decide between buying, renting, or leasing. But that assumes that the finance systems are in place. And are they? I don't know. We need to deliver it fully operational and ready to go with a full warranty backup. Then there's all the after sales itself. It's got to be insured. The goods have got to be insured. You need all the normal business insurance. You've got to cover your riders. The fuel, the electric battery charging systems need to be in place. We do not want any fires in the depot. Thank you very much. Overnight. Then you've got to think about training packages for the riders, the mechanics, and for the managers, although that's largely going to be in fleet management and logistics, where in fact there's already a lot of training available. Must be full digital integration. We want smart mobility here, please, e-commerce links. And then, yes, after your organization's finished owning a cargo bike, we've got to be able to reuse, recycle it, re-engineer it, make it part of the circular economy. But what is the cyclogistics? That was the Cargobike ecosystem. What about the cyclogistics element? Well, it's all of the above, plus we've got to worry about premises. Crucially, they've got to be affordable and in the right place. We need the right adaptations to cargo bikes to suit the work that's being undertaken. If you're carrying a load of bikes to reposition them on a bike share, you need a system of being able to roll the bikes on and off very fast. Then we want smooth integration into logistics systems. Containerization is being looked at very closely in the world of cargo bike operations at the moment, but also micro hubs, and that links back to premises. Got to fret about cargo bike parking and whether it's secure and whether it's avoiding having people trip up over cargo bikes on pavements and so on and so forth. One of the best solutions in narrow streets, of course, is to steal a car parking space and put cargo bike parking there instead. Then it needs municipal council full-on support, mainly in the areas of planning. Can we have our micro hub where we want it? Is the zoning okay? And on procurement. And in particular, the council can be running its own services using cargo bikes, of course. We need the right sticks, not just carrots. Have we got mandatory zero emission deliveries to create livable cities with breathable air? And the regulatory environment needs to enable rather than hinder commercial operation. And at ECLF and City Changer Cargo Bike Project and Cycling Industries Europe, we're very, very engaged with the current development of industry standards in the CEN structure. If anybody doesn't know that acronym, please ask me in the questions. So who are we? We're a bunch of keenies. We've had to be keen because initially, until the last 2 years, it was all very slim pickings, but it's really roaring off down the tracks now as cargo bikes and cyclogistics. We're cycling advocates, we're cyclogistics operators, companies and social enterprises. We're from universities and other academic research institutes. We're transport consultants and others concerned with livable cities and the urban environment. And we're cargo bike manufacturers and all the suppliers to them. And since 2019, ECLF, the last 3 years, has had a strategic partnership with the key European advocate organization for cycling, Cycling Industries Europe in Brussels. And we're very, very blessed to be part of the €4 million City Changer Cargo Bike project. And so without further ado, I welcome you to our world, and I'll now unshare my screen and we can hear from Susanna Wrighton. And Susanna is the technical director of the City Charger Cargo Bike project. And she is going to explore how we support the decision for a family to move from a car to a cargo bike, or perhaps to ditch a second car, or perhaps to prevent them buying a car in the first place. And therefore, what is the ecosystem that is needed for that to happen? Susanna, seize the screen, please.
I think I already did. Can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
I can see it. That's really strange. Okay, I'll do it again. Freigeben. Now? Can you see my screen
great.
now?
That's
yeah.
Perfect.
Wonderful. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today and tell you a little bit more about how you can hopefully get families to switch from cars to cargo bikes. And it's the City Changer Cargo Bike project, even so we are charging along, that's true. So my colleagues and I are really firm believers that our cities in order to change for the better, we need to change our lifestyle. And we think that cargo bikes can really play a very big role there. So our first EU-funded project on the promotion of cargo bikes in urban areas, and I've seen already some people who were with us in this first project, started in 2011, and now we are on the third project, the City Changer Cargo Bike project, with 16 city partners. And I think it's true to say that we are more convinced than ever that cargo bikes are a fantastic tool to make our cities more livable. So we definitely do not want to accept that our children are afraid to go outside to play, that basically it's not safe anymore because most of the space is given over to cars anyway. That in front of the schools is really dangerous because cars are allowed there in most of the streets all day long. And basically most of the traffic rules are made for the requirements of cars anyway. So I think that over these last 10 years that we've been working on cargo bike, promoting cargo bikes, most cities in Europe will agree with us that cargo bikes are climate friendly, they save space, they are healthy, not only for private people, but also for commercial uses, a healthy transport option. And they can do something else for us. They can make our cities safer. So usually when somebody gets hurt or maybe killed in a city because of lorries driving around, then at least in Austria, then politicians start talking about technological solutions and regulations. And yet the solution would be so easy if we would have more cargo bikes on our roads, because these cargo bikes, they don't have blind spots and therefore are not so dangerous to pedestrians and cyclists. So as Richard has already mentioned, our study, this baseline study that we did already in 2012 during the first city cargo bike project, where we established that at least 50% or more could be shifted from cars or vans to bikes and cargo bikes. When I say shift, then I mean transport trips. So they could be very different trip purposes, from delivery trips to service trips, and also just private logistics trips, like when you're going shopping or transporting your leisure equipment. Of course, for all these trip purposes, there are different possibilities to shift. So when we look at these private trips, then the possibility to shift, because they are usually short and not heavy goods are transported, is almost 80%. And we don't even talk about transporting persons, so preferably children. So that comes on top of it, of course. So we just have to have a look at Copenhagen when we want to know a little bit more about the possibility to shift and about the potential. Copenhagen is a city with about under 600,000 inhabitants, so a bit bigger than Leeds and smaller than the metropolitan region of Leeds. And they have 40,000 cargo bikes or so. So it's about every fourth family with 2 or more children that have a cargo bike, and thus replace a second car or sometimes even a car with it. So how do we get people to make this shift? So we were asking ourselves this over these last projects. And of course, certain activities and measures have proven more effective than others. So it's no surprise, of course, that subsidies, for instance, or tax releases are the most effective, or ranking among the very effective. It can also be seen by the enormous amount of increase of cargo bike subsidies. All over Europe, there are about almost 300 such subsidies now, according to the ECF website. But in Germany and Austria alone, we have over 100 Cargobike subsidies. And I'm really proud to say that the longest standing or the oldest Cargobike subsidy is from Graz, because we started our subsidy in 2011. So we are celebrating our 10th anniversary. And with regard to the most in one region, the winner is definitely Bavaria. They have, I think, in 32 municipal programs that support the purchase premiums for Cargobike. So that's really quite impressive. But of course, apart from the subsidy programs, for all those people who might not need a Cargobike all the time, or for those people who maybe cannot afford it or don't have a place where they can park it securely, Cargobike rental and sharing systems are extremely important, or a very big promoter. So there's, for instance, this example of Carvelo2Go in Switzerland. They have over 300 Cargobikes running in over 70 communes in Switzerland. And it also gives the people the possibility to try out Cargobikes. So I think combining subsidies with Cargobike rental and sharing schemes, and also improving the infrastructure and doing a lot of information work is probably the most effective way that you can promote Cargobikes. So if we look at what private users want, so then I can definitely say it's very important for them to be able to try out their Cargobikes. There are so many different models, and each one rides a little bit differently. So people need to find their own, what they feel comfortable with, and maybe also want to sort of have an individual style that fits their lifestyle. And of course, it's very important that the safety is guaranteed for children. For the children, I think that's probably the most important point for parents. And then infrastructure, Richard has mentioned it, safe Cargobike parking, not only at home, but also in the city, is a very important point, and information. So for instance, in Graz, where we have this program running since 10 years now, we did a survey last summer, and still a lot of the citizens haven't heard that there is such a funding going on. So when we look at the side of what municipalities can do, then at the top of my list, there would be regulations. So regulations are very important if you want to sort of shift a lot of your delivery trips or logistics trips to Cargobikes, obviously with access restrictions for motorized cars. But at the same time, they also promote the use, the private use of Cargobikes, because people feel safer, and it goes hand in hand with this safe infrastructure. So when we sort of claim one car lane, maybe parking car lane, then of course it makes it much safer. I already mentioned the tryouts and the sharing and rental schemes, and this is a picture, for instance, from Vienna, and there we told them that the best way really is to sort of combine sharing with rental, or sharing subsidy with sharing schemes. And this is what they did in addition to their subsidy schemes for private Cargobikes. They also introduced this Grätzl bikes, so they are bikes for different districts in Vienna, which enables people not only to use Cargobikes if they use them only rarely, but also to try them out. So taxation and subsidy, we have already talked about. Information as well. So for instance, the city of Vienna also really did a big information and marketing campaign in addition to their subsidy schemes and their sharing schemes. And last but not least, I think a city can change their procurement rules and lead by example by integrating Cargobikes into their city-owned fleets to show what cargo bikes can do. And I'd like to kind of leave you with a few research questions, or still some open questions. So how can we help families to switch more effectively from car use to cargo bike use? Is it maybe through social media? Is local press better, or visits from door to door, and maybe some workshops in kindergartens to make the children our teachers, or some nudging strategies? It's also quite important to have a look how cargo bikes are perceived in your city. That differs greatly from Eastern European to Western European cities. And so you can there also find ways that are more effective to promote cargo bikes. So are the incentives widely publicized? I already mentioned that. And then, of course, it's also important to see who the main user groups are in your city for the cargo bikes. And maybe you can form some strategic cooperations, maybe with public transport operators and so on. And we've already talked about restrictions. So, of course, I don't say it's easy to reclaim our cities, to make them more human-centered. So it definitely needs great role models. And as a last step, I would just like to draw your attention to our website and to the many publications, the 20 good reasons for cargo bike use, for instance, or how to transport children. We have a whole array of brochures, so please go and have a look at our website. And I believe I'm out of time, so I just like to quickly play you the video.
Wir haben uns in Graz kennengelernt und haben gemeinsame Freunde gehabt und haben auch in so einem gemeinnützigen Verein Südwind gemeinsam Aktivitäten gemacht. Am Anfang hast du ein bisschen Italienischunterricht gemacht mit mir.
Und im Austausch hat er mir Gitarren beigebracht. Das hat nicht geklappt, aber er hat gut jetzt Italienisch gelernt, weil wir sind oft bei meiner Familie in Italien. Ich sehe oder habe erlebt, wie in Italien es ist, das Leben und wie es hier ist. Und ich finde, vielleicht ein Zwischenweg wäre auch gut.
Ja, einen ersten eigenen Anknüpfungspunkt haben wir eigentlich mit diesem Lastenradkollektiv gehabt, das wir schon vor 5 Jahren quasi gemeinsam gegründet haben und uns auch mit einer Runde von Freunden ein Lastenrad besorgt haben und das gemeinschaftlich genutzt haben, wo in Graz eigentlich noch recht wenige Lastenräder herumgefahren sind. Und inzwischen haben wir es eben geschafft, dass wir unser eigenes Lastenrad anschaffen. Die Nutzung auch auf ganz verschiedene Arten, dass man eben jetzt mit dem Auto natürlich als Transportmittel für ihn, Siedeln mit Lastenrad oder mehreren Lastenrädern funktioniert auch.
Mit Freunden hin und her den ganzen Tag, aber es war lustig zumindest, das kann man sagen. Wir hatten vorher kein Auto gehabt zum Beispiel und ich hatte, wenn ein Sohn kommt, vielleicht braucht man das Navi. Wir haben es geschafft, dass wir so weitermachen. Aber ich würde mir wünschen, dass man nicht auf die gleiche Straße, wo Straßenbahn und Bus und Fahrräder alle zusammenfahren.
Und dass die Fahrradwege einfach auch Lastenrad entsprechend breiter sind.
Ich finde, dass Artus ein großes Glück hat, dass er mit zwischen 2 Kulturen und 2 Sprachen aufwachsen kann.
Yeah.
So thank you, Susanna. If you give us the screen back, that would be nice. So, Susanna Baum, please. You're next up, please. If you'd like to seize the screen, that would be great. Susanna Baum is at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences and has helped greatly in the growth of our understanding of cargo bikes and cyclogistics with her researchers, with herself and her colleagues. And here she's going to discuss the latest research, which was published in April. Over to you, Susanna. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the invitation, Richard. Well, the last 2 years we have done research into the use of zero-emission vehicles for the service industries, and a large focus we had was on Cargobike. So besides that, we also looked at electric vans. But yes, we also see great potential for Cargobike. So that was our focus and will be the focus of my presentation. What we see in research on zero-emission logistics is that there's not a lot of focus on service logistics. So it's a lot of the time it's about food or waste or parcels, but the service industries is often neglected, and that's also why we took this opportunity to really focus on this group. It's also needed because their trips are very different if we look at the characteristics than for freight transport. And that is because they also do a specific service on the location. So it's not really about transport itself alone, but also about doing a service at the location of your customer. Another reason why this group is interesting is that they're working on sustainability themselves a lot. So yeah, we call practice what you preach. Here you can see those two guys installing solar panels, or perhaps the next trip might be to install a charging infrastructure. Then you also expect them to drive in a sustainable way. But yeah, so like I said, they do installation, repair, maintenance work. And I just got stuck 20 minutes before this presentation for 20 minutes in the elevator. And I can tell you, like these guys, they should do the maintenance then. And the only thing you care about is the speed that they will save you from the elevator. And you don't really care about the emissions. So this is a typical or a specific aspect of this group, that speed and doing the service is a great, it's on top of the agenda, and zero emission transport is not as important for their business yet. But what we see is that they, I go to the next slide. Yeah, they take a large share of both the emissions from delivery vans and also the space that they take in the city. Here's a picture of Amsterdam. And we also did a lot of countings with students. And we saw that like about 25% of the parked vehicles is a service van. So that's a lot of space that's taken by this group. And they also take a large share of the kilometers traveled. Here you can see it's estimated about 35%. So if we're talking about reducing the emissions in logistics, we should definitely also look at service logistics. So that's what we have done. One of the activities that we did, and maybe here it's also nice to mention all the other different sectors that, like I said, freight and post construction are also big in terms of delivery events, but it's a lot smaller. So there's a lot of focus on parcel deliveries, but here you can see it's only 5% of the pie. So what we did was that we analyzed the trips of a lot of different service companies. Here are the results of 4. And we analyzed the number of stops per day that they have and the numbers of kilometers traveled per day. And like Richard said, if you look at the average kilometers driven, then sometimes that might be suitable for a cargo bike, for example. But it's interesting to see that there's a very large variety in their trips. So the average might be suitable, but it's also, we also need to look at the maximum of the kilometers, because that are trips that they want to carry out as well. And especially if there's any urgency, then they don't have time to look for another solution. So that's why all these companies, they drive a lot in traditional delivery vehicles. These companies that are listed here, they, for example, do technical installation work in offices or in houses. So there's also a housing corporation that was included in our research. Unica is a technical installation company. So we saw a lot of differences between these companies, but also the engineers that we looked at, they have a lot of differences per day, per week. So it's not easy to, not even possible to develop a solution that fits all. So we've explored a few cases and solutions that might be suitable for them to be adopted. One is this solution with a micro hub at the edge of the city. We call the micro hub, it's just a container, but where they can install some materials and where they can park a cargo bike. And the engineer, he drove to this point, and then he did his round trip from here. And he had to swap energy meters in houses, so it was really a centralized area where he had to work, and it was a lot faster to go by the bike. But even more important was that they save a lot of parking costs. In Amsterdam, in the area where you work, it's $7.50 per hour. So they calculated that after 33 hours of work, you could, and saving the parking cost, you could lease a cargo bike for a month. So it is looking at the business case of this micro hub here. It was really in the savings of parking costs. Another positive aspect of this case was that the client, in this case Leander, they provided the location, so they didn't have any cost for that. And here you can also see that collaboration within the logistics chain will benefit the possibilities that they see. So really working together with your client to see what the options are. A lot of our study also included the engineers themselves. So you can, of course, you can talk to a fleet manager or a sustainability manager within the organizations. But in the end, it's the engineer that needs to drive to the clients and perform the trips. And he's used to drive in a van with the radio on and to eat his sandwich during the lunch and to go to the wholesaler. And now we ask him to drive on a cargo bike. So it was not easy to find a lot of enthusiastic engineers that wanted to test this. Also because it's really different from the way they work. And what we see in other psychologistics initiatives, it's also often new type of businesses and new type of employees, or really cycle-minded persons that then start a company in psychologistics. But here we have we focus on the traditional sector. So behavior and adoption and including the wishes of the employees was really important too, especially because there's a large shortage of technical labor. So they also can demand quite a lot from their employee. So we applied this model as well to see what kind of behavioral interventions can you apply within an organization to make the engineer able and willing to change its behavior and to drive a cargo bike, and for example to use this micro hub on the beginning and the end of the day. So that's about making them able, so they should be they have the capacity, for example, to drive a cargo bike. They should be willing, there's motivation is needed, and they should have the opportunity. So here you can see there are a lot of different interventions that you can do. For example, training. Of course, you can force them or you can reward them, facilitate them. A nice example of that is that the company, for one of our partners, they facilitated a location where the engineers could have lunch, because before they would just have lunch in their van. Now they say, well, it's not really nice to eat my sandwich on the cargo bike. And then they gave them some vouchers to go to a cafe and have lunch there. So it was really looking at what do the engineers want, what makes them happy on a working day. And it's not about just, well, next to this changing the behavior, it's also about changing the logistics concept. Here's an example of a new solution or a location where they can switch from a van to a cargo bike. They were also looking at sharing cargo bikes, but of course then you really need to make sure that they're available, and there are different options for using these locations in cargo bikes. So it's about logistics, it's about behavior, and it's also about energy. This energy aspect is even more important when we are talking at, we're looking at larger vehicles that need to be charged. But still also when we are scaling the cargo bikes, it's also a question where will they charge the cargo bike, and is there enough energy for it? So this is what we've explored, which logistics concepts, charging strategies, and behavioral interventions can be used to realize zero-emission transport for service organizations. And my last slide is here to conclude some of our findings. First, the road to zero-emission mobility does not start with the vehicle. It's really about strategic, tactic, and operational decisions about your activities, the agreements that you have with your clients, your personal policy, where do you get your personal from, do you require them to have a driver license, or maybe you can focus on younger engineers that might want to cycle. It's about logistics, it's about planning your routes in a way that makes it possible to drive a cargo bike. So it doesn't start with the vehicle, it's not a one-by-one replacement. Second, service engineers themselves play a key role. So they're the persons that drive the cargo bike, but also they play a key role in, for example, the maintenance of zero-emission solutions. And the example that I mentioned before was the use of charging infrastructure. So we also need these engineers to be educated on zero-emission solutions. Third, the clients dictate the speed at which service organizations can start. We really see that it helps if the client, especially when they're large, if they're also asking for zero emission, or for example, facilitate space for a micro hub or to store some inventory. So to have this collaboration within the chain instead of having a client that only cares about speed of the service, for example. Last, the solution providers should work together to create a strong proposition. For example, what we see is that, for service companies, it's pretty difficult to make this transition because then they need a cargo bike, but they also need this behavioral change, and they need charging, and they need, all the things that Richard actually mentioned on his slide. There are a lot of aspects next to, having a cargo bike that should be organized well. And it helps if the providers of these solutions work together. So, for example, if there's a network of micro hubs, or if there's you can buy if there's maintenance services, or now you can see it's quite scattered among the market, and it would help if they work more together. Well, we have summarized this in a large report, which is also available in English. So if you would like to receive it, then please send me an email. And of course, I'm available for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne Baum. And Susanna's details are in the chat, as indeed are several questions and so on. I am keeping a close track of the questions, and I've not easily been able to answer some of them immediately. They're discussion points, but I've kept a record of them, and some I've tried to give some feedback straight away. So without further ado, we're going to move on to Beata Kubitz, who's going to seize the screen, aren't you, Beata? Beata is, depending on the hour of the day or the day of the week, is a journalist, is a transport consultant, an investigator. But today, Beata is going to speak to us wearing her Cargodale hat, a very specific baby born of COVID, and shall let her explain more. And Beata's going to be thinking about how you get from the urge, the keenness to do something that's zero emission and so on and is decarbonized, but also earn a living out of it, make it viable. Very much. Over to you, Beata.
Thank you, Richard. I don't think we've quite got that far yet, but we're giving it a go. Cargodale was a project that I launched in March last year, because I live in a rural area in Calderdale in West Yorkshire, And everyone has always said cargo bikes, they never work in rural areas. They just work in the centre of cities and limit your ambitions. But along came lockdown, along came COVID, and suddenly it seemed like that there was an opportunity to try something in an extraordinary circumstance that would be quite different to an urban cargo bike delivery service. So the service that I launched, which is slightly different from what we have now, was just an all-comers, we will deliver it service. We hired a Paxter, a Reese Muller Paxter 80, which is a sizable cargo bike with what I have learnt is the top of the line motor setup for cargo bikes, and which, having thought maybe this would be gone and done and dusted in a week when I couldn't get up any hills, I discovered that actually it's exactly the kind of machine that will get up the sorts of hills that you can see pictured on the left. So it was a hired cargo bike. It was a load of excitable volunteers who were quite limited by lockdown, cyclist friends, mountain bikers, people that we met on the grapevine, who were all very keen to ride bikes in what was lovely sunshine at the time and deliver for any businesses that were having trouble getting their goods to customers, and any customers who were having locked down, self-isolating. There were a lot of people who were keeping well out of the way back in March, April, May of last year. So we launched this service. We were pretty lucky to have great weather, great volunteers, enthusiastic businesses in a small town in West Yorkshire. In fact, in a series of small towns, we had a project in Hebden Bridge, which is 5,000 people, and Todmorden, which is 10,000 people. And we all then got some funding to expand to Halifax, which I think may rise to dizzying heights of 80,000 people. The whole of Calderdale is a couple of 100,000 people. So it's a dispersed, semi-rural neighbourhood. Let's come on. And the first lesson that we learnt, the most exciting lesson, was that actually cargo bikes in semi-rural areas are not so different from urban cargo bikes in a lot of ways. That it is possible to ride cargo bikes between drops in all sorts of circumstances, weathers and landscapes. It's very much about loading. We discovered we could do a bit of containerization using the trusty Euro crate, and we could create small loads and smart dynamic loops that meant that we were loading up 6 to 10 people's shopping, going off on one of our little routes, dropping off 6 to 10 people's shopping, coming back. And if we were smart about the way we grouped that, it was a nice, sustainable, pleasurable for our riders and sustainable for our bikes. We also discovered there was a lot of potential for micro consolidation in small towns like Todmorden. We've had a very traditionally cash-based, very normal type of shopping experience, but we found that lots of businesses were quite prepared to try out digital payments, try out digital platforms, and work together. And this was quite interesting and quite exciting. And the other thing, because I did a lot of riding cargo bikes myself, was that if you chatted to people where you were delivering in our small town, they were very enthusiastic about cargo bikes, and they were so enthusiastic about that the town board has found some money to keep a permanent cargo bike project in Todmorden, because there's a big feeling that we have poor air quality despite being in this quite rural neighbourhood. And that we should really be doing our best to improve the situation for everyone. There's also a recognition that we're not going to do that overnight. What else? So cargo, this was a, Richard asked me to talk about what the practicalities are and what the barriers are in a small place like this, or and to setting up an enterprise. So I think the first thing that we ran up against was the question from people that that you're going to cycle this up that hill. it's not been something that's ever really been considered. And although you may see cargo bikes in some of the flatter areas of the country, I think there was a lot of "you're absolutely barking mad" at the start of Cargodale. However, we equipped our riders with cheery smiles and lots of weatherproof clothing, and generally did our best to make sure their lives were easy. And they repaid us by climbing every hill, delivering to every remote farm, and generally giving people a great experience of having a cargo bike delivery. We were kind of helped by being quite data savvy. We put trackers on the bikes, so and we used Calderdale has quite a good map of addresses. So our cargo bike riders could get to quite remote addresses. And just to reiterate, not everywhere in Todmorden is remote. You tended to be doing 19 drops in very, terraced houses in short streets that were really not off the main road very far, and then one which would be up that massive hill there. So it was kind of quite a mixed experience. It wasn't entirely one type of riding or another. So demand was the first thing, and actually persuading people that this was getting people to think of us. Quite often shopkeepers have had their own vans, and then we also have an absolute plethora of Amazon and Hermes and all of those people clogging up our streets and our roads, and that's quite a big issue in our area, because if you meet the Hermes or DPD ban on some of our roads, you have to reverse for half a mile, or one of you has to reverse for half a mile before you can pass each other. So there are some definite benefits to cargo bikes in the rural area. Infrastructure was the other barrier. We discovered lots of that we have more cycle lanes than we thought, but we also discovered that some of them are not suitable for cargo bikes. One of the things I realised quite quickly was that if everyone obeyed the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in the centre of towns, we'd be much more set onto an equitable an equitable basis with the vans. They wouldn't really be significantly faster than we were in the centre of towns, and I think I'd like to see that enforced a lot more, just for the sense of a nicer sense of place and a better feeling that you're not just a town that's being driven through on the way to somewhere else. So I think there's an element of pride in that, as well as practicality. We discovered that it was pretty difficult to find cycle insurance, and we had to do a lot of investigation. We had someone from who had bikeability training adapt their training to deliver it to our riders. There was lots of auxiliary things which were interesting and we had to grapple with in order to deliver our services. The other thing was we've done a number of contracts for the local authority, and they just want absolutely enormous insurance not premiums, but they want £10 million coverage. So that's kind of quite a big element of getting someone to sell you insurance that covers all eventualities is an issue. We also discovered that I talked about data and I talked about our mapping and using trackers. We discovered that a lot of the tracking and route planning software that's out there is very car specific and doesn't work that well for cargo bikes. What you would like, the order in which you would like to tackle a route on a cargo bike can be quite different from the route that you take in a car. And Google Maps is utterly useless in a rural area because everything is based on postcodes, which can cover quite a number of square miles in some of the places that we were delivering to. So that was suboptimal, I think, and that this sort of leads on to what would you really like to see to be able to see better adoption of cargo bike delivery. I think. Well, before we do that, the rewards that we found were, as I was talking about, lots of discussions about air quality, and I sort of did a bit of air quality measurements using a Plume commercially available air quality sensor, and our Valier is surprisingly not great. The decarbonisation, we managed to look at some of our shops that we worked with, and tell them how much carbon they'd saved, which absolutely delighted them. The idea of working together and producing, shops for people that would use a number of different shops in the market was really exciting to traders in the market and to people who wanted to shop there. And there's what's been really great, what I say to my riders all the time is every time you go out on a bike, you are there making it safer for other people to cycle as well as yourselves. And I think we have seen a real uptake, part of the pandemic benefit, but an uptake of people who are using bikes for utility purposes, both cargo bikes and normal bikes for sort of trips around town. And that it's been noticeable and it's been sustained. We've been seeing that ever, since lockdown. It's not entirely gone away. We've also even had a few people buy cargo bikes in the area, having tried out our bikes. So there's been definitely a benefit over time. How am I? That's not where I wanted to be. Give me 1 more minute. So to sort of conclude, I think that the thing that I was kind of like thinking about as to answer Richard's question about what we need to research on, what really the barriers are, we need to look at things like distribution hubs for cargo bikes. How are they different from van distribution hubs? What's different about the scale? What's different about parking? What's different about where you can site them from vans? How, if you move into a kind of more integrated distribution system where you're working, for instance, we get a lot of last mile delivery in our valley, or we get a lot of vans in our valley. How would we possibly create a system that delivers those parcels up narrow roads, which are difficult to navigate in big diesel Mercedes vans? How would that work? How could we distribute parcels instead of vans that we don't really like seeing on our roads? And then the other thing that I think is just needs a lot of work on is the software that we use for cargo bikes, both individually to cargo bikes, the route planning, the address finding, all of those things, but also how would they be integrated with bigger vehicles? How would you decide to use a cargo bike instead of a van? How would you integrate a route between cargo bikes and vans and last mile delivery? So those are the sort of questions that I think we need to answer, and we'll need to work on probably in a quite practical way over the next year, or not too many years, I hope, given that we've got this rapid deadline approaching of needing to be at net zero. But I think that this is something that we need to be working on as a community in different places and different environments. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak.
Thank you very much, Beata. And when you've got your breath back, can just have a look on the chat. There are various things you might want to throw in some comments on. And just as we're broadly on time at the moment, I'm going to just reply verbally to one question from somebody called Craig. I'm afraid I don't know any more about you, Craig. You say a lot of discussion of air quality here, as a lot of you are aware. Are there, or have you got links with your local public health infrastructure? And the thing I'd point to you to, Craig, is considerable interest at the moment, is that in central London, there is a very large hospital complex called Guy's and St Thomas Trust, and by the River Thames, and they have an offshoot charity called Impact on Public Health, and on urban health, and they are actually funding a Bikes for Business program because they see it as an immediate way of responding today to the challenge of decarbonising logistics and delivery. So that's one little example of where public health is contributing directly to the growth in cargo bikes. Impact on Urban Health is what they're called. The work is being done by a marketing and transport consultancy called MP Smarter Travel by a guy called Ollie Ivans. And if you're interested in all that, I can't recommend you talking them too strongly. So I've just realized I have my camera off throughout that. Without further ado, we're going to finish with Tom Asman, who manages to combine being the chair of the Radlogistikverband Deutschland. Sorry about the pronunciation, Tom. This is the German Cyclogistics Federation. And he also is a research lead at the Otto von Guericke University in Magdeburg in Germany, and has spent a lot of his working life looking at every aspect of cargo bike operation. And Tom is going to focus on gaps in our knowledge in order to speed up take-up of cargo bikes. Thank you very much, Tom. The floor is yours. Can't hear you at the moment.
Now, you should hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the introduction. And actually, my work time is pretty short till now, so it's not so difficult to spend most of the time with cargo bikes. And what I'm going to talk about today is our knowledge gaps in our cargo bike system. And what I will start with is the cargo bike itself, and looking at the engineering perspective of cargo bikes and looking at the technology or technology ecosystem around it. What we can see is a very high dynamic of engineering. What we can see is more and more automotive companies going into this market. So at this point, my hypothesis is that actually we are not going to have a knowledge gap, because all the competences in building technical ecosystems and building business ecosystems around a vehicle is going into the direction of cargo bikes. Not everywhere, but some companies and also bigger ones are going into this one. And this is going to kind of help us speed up the cargo bike ecosystem. And we have a vision, and Richard put forward a vision for the cargo bikes to replace half of the vans. There will also be a likely reality. And what we honestly do not know right now is what is the potential. So we had it in the discussion during Richard's talk. There's a study by the Cyclogistics Project, the first one, which is stating that 51% of motorized trips with good transport in cities can be replaced by cargo bikes. This is an interesting figure, but actually this is a figure based on current traffic situations. So it does not answer us what happens if we change the traffic, if we change transportation entirely, if we change the way how we build our cities. Can we even have a higher potential? It also doesn't really tell us how many vehicle miles traveled we can substitute. And this is most important for assessing how much carbon dioxide we can reduce. It's not about the vehicle sold, it's about the vehicle miles traveled, which matter here. And here is one knowledge gap which is urgent, that currently you have life cycle assessment values, so which tell you everything about the environmental impact of a product. You have it for cars, you have it for trains, you have it for every means of transport. But there are no LCA values for cargo bikes. And this is a big and urgent need for research to close this one. And upcoming, although we really do not exactly know how many bikes we do need to sell or how many bikes we can sell. And this leads to another pretty important aspect, how many jobs can be created, and this is also what we do not really know right now, how many people are already employed. But looking at the policy perspective, this is one of the most important figures to tell people, yeah, cargo bikes can create jobs, cargo bikes will create jobs and cargo bikes can lead to a green transformation of economy. And what we know, and actually it was discussed already today, we know many success factors of cargo bikes. We know that we need to have cheap operational costs and cheap cost per stop. Cargo bikes need to be reliable, easy to maintain, they need to be usable, and they need to be fast, and at least in cities, faster than cars. We also know, and this is what Susan Born had a very interesting talk about, we know that cargo bikes and the usage of cargo bikes has a lot to do with lifestyle, with social norms, how people behave. And we also know what regulations we would need to implement. We also know what infrastructure we need to provide. But actually the question is this sufficient? Is this sufficient to really make cargo bikes the game changer in urban transportation to green our transportation system? And I think this is maybe not enough. It's not enough to just know the success factors. It's more that we have to look at the bigger picture, that we have to change the paradigm. We have to change the paradigm from a car-centric planning approach, from a car-centric way how we build cities and rural areas, to a human-scaled city and society. And the matter here is, can cargo bikes be a driver of this change? Can they help us to transform the cities? And the question is, what is necessary for cargo bikes to do that? And then we should ask how the ecosystem should look like to really change the way we build and we design our cities. And this speeding up of a cargo bike ecosystem actually is something which is not new. Looking to the left side of time, at the beginning of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th century, but we had cities which were of at least half the size of current cities, which were with at least the same amount of people living in it, and with way more sustainable modes of transport than today, and with a very, very high share of cargo bikes. And it was even said that cargo bikes in some spheres, especially for commercial traffic, are a dominant mode of transport. And this is what you also can see at the pictures. So those are examples that cargo bikes were used some decades ago, and that actually it's not something new. But the interesting point is that we can start to learn something out of the first decline of the cargo bike. If we want to have cargo bikes rise up again, we should know why cargo bikes did decline. What made them disappear as commercial vehicles? Why did nobody use them anymore? Why did they even kind of got forgotten? In most countries currently, cargo bikes are celebrated as new big things, but actually they are something old, but the society did not just remember them anymore. And what were in former times these driving forces to state that cargo bikes were a dominant mode of transport, and what were the value chains and the business models designed around the cargo bike? What made it possible to use a cargo bike for butchers, for bakers, and all the other local value chains which were in place? This is something we really have close to no knowledge about, but would help us to bubble up cargo bike systems. And we could also put it differently. How could it happen that the car transformed urban transportation entirely? So the decline of the cargo bike comes along with the rise of the car. And if we now want the car to decline and the cargo bike to rise, what we need to learn is what made the car price of the cargo bike decline. And this is quite unknown sphere. One tipping point is the long-term vision. Those are some old figures from Bernhard von Reichow, a neo-Nazi traffic planner that's most influential in Germany, from the first future Rama or Colin Buchanan from UK. And what you can see from those images is that the rise of the car came along with long-term visions, with big plans, with a promise for a better city and a definition of how this better city will look like and how it will be reached. And this is something we are lacking. We have some first starts towards a new vision of a city. This is a picture which is used in Paris to do some lobbying for the transformation of Paris, that this is for a city, but it's not for the cargo bike. We currently have no vision, no long-term sound plan how a future cargo bike city should look like and what infrastructure we do need for it. And this is a serious problem because currently how we implement cargo bikes is somewhere in the cities there's a problem, we have some emissions, we have some congestion, then somebody thinks, okay, we need to do something with cargo bikes, or then this is difficult to implement because the business model does not work pretty good, or we do not have appropriate space, or something else. And then, but at the end, you reach a small pilot. It's a step forward, but it's just a step forward. What we need is a vision. And with this long-term vision, we have the means to create the space, the infrastructure, the zones for transshipment, and so on, to really impose structural changes which are needed to reach 50% cargo bike in the future. And one last point is we need also to face reality. It's not about just having a long-term vision or not. It's also to have data. And currently, the data of cities, what is happening in the city, what is happening in commercial traffic, is very, very weak. Even one did one count, and one of the best counts I could find till now of a city, what goods are transported within a city. This is the first step we need to go in order to think about how to create an ecosystem and how to transform a system. In a nutshell, you have the technical means at hand. You also have the urban planning means, you have the regulation means, and so on. What is necessary, and where we need to create more and more knowledge, is a vision and a long-term strategy of how to transform a city with cargo bikes and with other modes of transport. And we need to gain competencies in changing the paradigm. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.